it's not a simple decision to just go in and talk to someone once and they say, "Oh, I'm going to buy." They there are all sorts of contingencies, and there are other people involved, and it's complex, and there's integration, and you got to get buy-in, and all those sorts of things have to happen, and which complicates the sales process, and that's sort of to me that's kind of fun. That makes it interesting. It
Welcome you all to Soul in the Game podcast. In today's episode, we have Brendan McAdams, who loves sales, business to business sales, and he has written a book called Sales Craft. I met Brendan on Twitter and I had questions about selling, and I really wanted him to be on this show. It is a great honor to have conversation with Brendan because he is amazingly skilled in this and has a lot of knowledge and experience. I'm very, very appreciative of him agreeing to talk to me. Hope you enjoy listening to this. Even though you're not into sales, it opens up some thought process, which is great. Also, a reminder, if you have not yet subscribed to this podcast channel, please do subscribe. There is a new episode every Monday that comes out. Finally, enjoy the show.
So I've been in sales for for a long time, and I actually started my dad's a doc, and I actually started by selling this particular belt buckle via mail order, and so a long time ago that I got into it, where I would write a check to the for an advertisement in the Journal of Bone and Joint magazine. I don't think I've ever explained this to anyone before. And I would write a check for like $750, and it was a lot of money back then. This is a long time ago, and I would terrify me. But then after a week or two later, the envelopes would come in, the letters would come in with checks from doctors, and so it's really kind of got me into that space. So I've been in sales now for forever, and mostly enterprise sales, so selling to big, large accounts, business to business, B2B sales, and it's just been sort of fun. I just really enjoy it, and so that's probably where the kind of the enthusiasm comes from.
I love that story. Can you tell me, like, how did you figure out, if you remember, like, how did you come up with that idea? It's very
The,
creative.
the for the belt buckle.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, my dad wanted my dad wanted one, and he just thought it would be kind of a clever idea, and he goes to these conferences and knows other physicians and so forth, and he thought this would be a good thing to do, and so created a bronze, found a foundry that would make them for us, and had it designed, and it's based on the caduceus, which is this emblem of a tree being straightened by a post, and the idea is it's the representative symbol. I think it's Greek symbol of orthopedics and medicine and healing, and so it just kind of it sort of made sense, and so we started making them, and you'd buy them 100 at a time and whatever, and then we'd sell them via mail, and it was pretty cool. It's kind of magic.
Yeah, yeah, it sounds like that. And the raw material, like, there are so many thought you have to think about this, right? It's not just selling, but you are going into the supply chain, you're going into the raw materials,
Yeah.
manufacturing, and all that. So how does the sales part come in when you're actually manufacturing it, or when you're creating something? How does the sales part fit in there? Why is that so important?
Because at some point, I like to think of sales as I think other people have said this before as well, but I like this, and it's like good salespeople are really just helping you to make a decision, and that's the way I kind of look at it. I want them to make a good decision, and so in the sales in that sense, the idea is what can you do to help someone to make a good decision. And in the line of work that I'm in enterprise sales and B2B sales, that's usually a pretty complicated process. When you're going in and you're selling something to someone, it's not a simple decision to just go in and talk to someone once and they say, "Oh, I'm going to buy." They there are all sorts of contingencies, and there are other people involved, and it's complex, and there's integration, and you got to get buy-in, and all those sorts of things have to happen, and which complicates the sales process, and that's sort of to me that's kind of fun. That makes it interesting. It you know and a lot of moving parts and coordinating things. Those are all sort of, I don't know, they fascinate me. And so when you're selling into that environment, they're solving that problem is you can't fool someone into making a decision like to choose you. And so you're much better off figuring out, can I solve a problem for someone, and how do I do it? And if you can and you do it, then you're talking to the right person, and if the right company, or and if you can't, then the best thing you can do is tell them and move on, and even maybe even suggest, oh yeah, I can't help you with this, but these people may be able to. You might talk to them. And I think if you look at sales from that perspective, it's not nearly as harrowing or scary as it's often made out to be. It's not really rejection anymore. For example, it's now it's not a fit, and you should be happy about that. If it's not a fit, because now you're not getting yourself wrapped up in something that you ultimately are going to have problems supporting down the road. And so if you look at it through that lens, I think sales becomes a lot less of a burden or a chore, and much more about helping someone accomplish some end. And that's satisfying.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you mentioned the problem solving approach, right?
Yeah,
you're showing that what's the value in having this, or what's the value that this product or service can create in
yeah,
their life.
yeah.
But why does sales have such a bad rep? Like, I go to a car, buying a car, and then I'm really, I do not want to talk to them. I
Yeah,
want to make my decision. Like, why do you think it has such a bad rep?
there are so many reasons in the media, and so I guess ultimately, like at one level, in movies and TVs, there's nothing exciting in a sale that goes well. It's not it's not particularly exciting at any point. It's you're having these conversations that are quite, they're quite detailed and so forth, and there's so much time that's spent that's not, you know um, where there's no drama or conflict, right? And so those sorts of the cliche, first place Cadillac Eldorado, second place steak knives from Glenn Ross, which everybody quotes, is such a terrible. It's such a great dramatic moment, but it's so not consistent with what most sales is like. Would be one thing, and then the other is, and I think this is in fact I'm gonna have to write a blog post about this, but bad compensation plans are the are contribute so much to the bad reputation that that sales often has, and that is you compensate people for revenue at the expense of it being the right thing for the customer or even the company. I mean, I've witnessed so many instances where the comp plan motivates you to do something that really doesn't serve the company or the customer very well, and yet the salesperson can oftentimes be paid really well for a deal that's not in anybody else's best interest. And when those things happen, you end up with a lot of dissatisfied customers.
Yeah. So what that has a, the car sales versus the regular
Yeah, yeah.
whatever within the company, what they are doing, kind
And
of
this,
has a
like,
different.
I spend some time, I spend a lot of time talking to founders like you, like our little our consult session. I talk to founders a lot, and founders in particular should have their align. This is why I think founders should be selling early on, when you're just getting started, when you're getting your first your first customers, your first dozen, your first 100 customers. I want founders to be selling because their interests should be highly aligned with that of their customers. I mean, they should be when they're talking to a prospective customer and there's not a good fit for the product, they should know to walk away and find another customer, because that's not going to do them any good in the long haul. And so their interests should be highly aligned. And if they are, then again, the sales process should be relatively conversational and consultative. And if it's and so it again, it shouldn't be that difficult to do at that point.
As you're talking, I almost feel like it's like a making a recipe. I'm thinking of creating a recipe here.
Yeah,
You mentioned about interest aligned with the customers, right?
yeah,
Doesn't that take time for people to understand who the customers are, or how the thought process is of a particular customer? Is that when I go to buy a car, they would not know about me anything, right? They would just, okay, what's your, I'm, oh, I need an electric car or a hybrid car, and this is my thing. But it's very there are like only 5 6 points that I may be expressing, but there are so many other things that I'm not really expressing. Is that also
yeah,
part of
yeah,
customer? Yeah.
yeah. And it all kind of, the amount of the amount of discovery, if you will, that takes place obviously depends on how complex the situation is. Buying a car is relatively straightforward, but that's a great example. And I spend a lot of time. What I do is I coach. I am a sales coach to founders that are in their early stages, and again, I go back, and what I tell them is, I think you need to sell, but I can help you sell more effectively, make fewer mistakes, coach you in a way that allows you to do what you need to do and do it more efficiently, effectively. And that's kind of what I do. So your car sales example is a really good one. I mean, it's simple, but it's a very good one. And that is, like, when rather than try and put you in a car, you come onto the lot, and the salesperson asks you a bunch of questions, like what are you trying to, why do you want a car, what's your, how many people will be driving, where are you going to, do you commute every day, or is this or do you want something for the weekends, or this is the discovery process. And a good car salesperson would ask you a whole bunch of questions. And at some point, one of the questions the series of questions might be, you don't want a Ferrari. You're on the Ferrari lot. You really want a minivan. We don't sell minivans, so you should go over to the Chrysler dealership across the street. And that's a great sales example to me. So, but at the same time, if I ask you a bunch of questions, if I'm the car salesman in this instance, and I ask you a bunch of questions, then at the end of that, I know, oh, this is the sort of thing that you might like, and then I can tell you, here's what you might like, and you might like this car, and here's why, and here are the things that are great about it, and here are the things that are not so great about it, you may not like. And versus this one, and it has these same features, but it has this other feature, but it doesn't have this feature, or it's this much more, and all those sorts of things. And now I'm not telling you to buy a car. I'm saying these are the choices that you have available. And I like this one, but you may not. And you like this one, or you might. And now all of a sudden, the burden is off of me to sell you something. I'm helping you again
Mm-hmm.
to make a
Yeah.
decision. And if I'm doing it in a way genuine and generous and 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 based on information, based on based on data, if you will, then you're gonna look at me and say, oh, you know what, I trust this person. I trust him. He's given me a lot of to now I can make a better decision. Or you're gonna ask me some questions and I'm gonna give you good answers. And if I give you good answers, then and so it really becomes this. It's really much more of a conversation. It's not a sale. And at the end of that, you say, oh, I I'd like to, I want to buy this one, or I don't want to buy either, and here's why. You may have an objection, and I have to answer that objection, and then it's kind of it's a little bit of a dance, but it's at the end in the
Yeah.
end, I think you have to make the environment such that they want to buy and not that you're selling them, because the minute you're selling them, I think everyone their guard comes up. My guard comes up, and so at some point you have to you really want to try and make it as a comfortable an experience as possible. And car dealerships tend not to do that because their comp plans aren't designed that way. They're based on volume, and so if you leave the lot and don't buy, you're a missed opportunity. And so that comp plan is set up in a way to disincent the salesperson from having that kind of a conversation with
I love that example. I
you.
love how you explained as well. It makes sense. It's like really so clear. Okay, why this happens and why this doesn't happen. And you also mentioned about the enterprise sales or
Yeah,
B2B sales, right? So what's the difference between, for example, B2B is a
yeah.
business
Mhm.
to business and other types? What are the
Well, so they're
differences?
the ones that I always think of are B2B, and then there's B2C or direct to consumer. So B2C is business to consumer, and I will and I think I may have even told you this in our when before we started, is I don't really know much about B2C, and there are people that are very smart in that space, but B2C is much more of a volume based business. It's the kind of the it's much more marketing driven, so it's based on copywriting, and advertising and understanding demographics and a lot of really smart stuff. I had a chance when I was first getting into sales. I had a chance to work for Colgate, the toothpaste company, and uh, and I
Nice.
interviewed with them, and uh, and they were talking to me about a job, and I'm a kid at this point, right? And they were saying, well, here's one of the things we're wrestling with is I'm in charge of this particular person was in charge of the toothpaste division, and I'm interviewing and they're trying to figure out whether or not people like a screw cap or they want a flip top. The flip top was just coming out at the time, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is in the weeds. This is not what I want to do, right? Which is I don't want to be trying to figure out whether Soumya wants to buy a toothpaste with a flip
Yeah.
top versus a cap that screws on, or whether she likes a lot of mint or not much mint, or sparkles matter and things like that. And that's just a very different model. So that those people are very smart and they're very data driven, and that's not my area of expertise. I'm much more one-on-one. I talk to people. I enjoy talking to people and having conversations and figuring out what the problem is here versus what the problem is there, and how do I get both people happy, so that we solve a problem, and and I make a sale. And that's
Yeah.
much more of a B2B world, is where it's a much more conversation driven, much more of a, not entirely, but it's much more of a one-on-one sort of a sale than B2C, for example, or direct to consumer.
Right, right. Wow, there are so many things to think about here. I had no idea. And that Colgate, the toothpaste example you
Yeah,
gave reminds me of in one of the books I read, I think it's Habit by Charles
yeah,
Dugg, I think. He mentions about how human brains are wired to create the
Yeah.
habits, right? And toothpaste is one example he gives. We are just addicted to the flavor than actually the process of doing it. That's why we do it, go back and do every
Yeah.
single day as soon as we wake up. And the person who came up with that idea is that data driven,
Yeah.
like you mentioned, and understanding psychology of people, or
Yeah.
every person, and using that information. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
That's
sense.
just not my realm. People like that can do that are really smart. That's just not, that's not something that I've ever focused on. And I don't know that I'd even be good at that.
Brendan, this is also hard. This B2B it's a different ball
It
game
is. Yeah.
altogether. I mean, it is hard for me to understand. You make it so simple, and when I ask you questions, you're like, "Oh, try this approach or this approach," and then you make it really sound like, "Oh, that's so nice. Why didn't I think about this before?" Right? And yeah,
Well,
that's a
well,
totally
yeah,
different ball
part of that
game.
is, that's very nice of you to say, and part of it is I've been around for a long time, so I've seen a lot of things. I mean, so I've seen that there's a benefit that comes with that, is number one, and the other thing is, when you're a founder, and I'm guilty of this too. When you're a founder, it helps to you're kind of, you're in the trees, you're in the middle of the forest, and so sometimes it's hard to gain a different perspective, and so it's nice when to have someone like me come in and talk to you. And this is one of the kind of advantages that I think I bring to people oftentimes, is I come to the problem from a different angle, and as a consequence of that is I can oftentimes see things different, with a different perspective, because I haven't lived with it. I can ask some stupid questions. I can probe things in a different way. And the consequence of that is you get another, you get a different viewpoint. And that's where kind of a, not to put a pitch in, but that's where having a mentor or a coach or people who you can rely on from outside is really valuable, especially for founders early on, when their time is so valuable, and making mistakes can be really kind of not catastrophic necessarily, but they can really set you back. I mean, from a, not from a just a revenue standpoint, but from a momentum standpoint and a motivation standpoint. And so those things, when you're early on, startups are fragile, especially in the beginning, and they they need a certain amount of it helps immensely if you can get some momentum early on, and it's oftentimes really hard to do, because you're still figuring things out. So if someone can help you figure things out a little quicker and kind of avoid some of the traps, boy, that can really be advantageous.
Yeah, that is I can totally resonate to that, to your points that you are mentioning here. So if the listeners, if you need a coach, reach out to Brendan. He is amazing. And also you're down to earth. That's what I really love about talking to you. You're very down to earth, and you're not, I get a feeling that you're not really judging me for like my silly
Oh,
stupid questions I
oh
ask.
no, not
So
at all. This is all fun. This is, to me, this is it's got to be, at some level, it has to be fun. So um so I know I love conversations like this.
yeah. And so I think we already talked about actually selling for selling versus, selling to create value.
Yeah,
You mentioned about that in the car sales thing. But when we are doing B2B, right? And if the business already has a customer or already has a product that they are using,
yeah,
the approach will be totally different. Like if a
right,
product is being used, and me approaching them, it takes a lot of I have to understand what their current product is doing, and then how I can help based on what is missing out of it, or how I can bring value in that case is
yeah,
one of the
yeah,
hardest scenarios in B2B. yeah, you have any
Oh
talking
yeah,
points on that?
this is an excellent. To me, this is one of my favorite kind of topics to talk about because and so it's an excellent question because I think in most cases everyone worries about competition, or people often do worry about competition, and I think the competition that people think of is the other vendor, and that's really almost never the competition. It is in a new sale, it can be, although even that's not even true. uh, the competition is usually whatever they're doing now and whatever they're doing today, whatever works for them today. And then so what you're trying to overcome is the status quo. And part of the status quo is the reason why they're in the status quo is the risk of doing something new is too great. The pain of it is doing too great. The 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 gain that they get isn't enough to make it worth doing it. So so I think about sales as as behavior change. In a sense, it's like you're asking them to make a change in their behavior. They have to do something differently. And the difference between B2B sales and selling a car, for example, is just the complexity that comes in the chain. There's just more, potentially more complexity. You step onto the car lot to buy a car, you may decide, yeah, my car's okay, I'm going to stick with it. And that's the the benefit of having a new car isn't great enough to, the risk of taking on a new payment isn't great enough. I've got this car, it works, it's, I can probably get another 50,000 miles out of it. I'm gonna just live with it. And so put off that decision, right? And so in a B2B world, it's sort of the same. That's the same kind of philosophy that or the same circumstances that you're up against. And so I liken it to a journey. And I actually, I'm talking about this in a couple of weeks on this very topic, and that is that I think that in sales you have to make the journey part of the sales uh, discussion, and that is, and you have to kind of address, hey, this is where you are today. This is where you're going in 6 months, in a month, whatever the time frame is to get them up and running. And you have to say, here's what you can expect over the next several months. And this is what we're going to do. We're going to do all these things for you. We're going to get you implemented. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. Here's what you need to do. And so I'm telling you up front, so that these are the obstacles you're going to run into. We're going to need you to give us this data file. We're going to need to meet with these people. You want to get 3 or 4 really good evangelists to buy in. And so here's how we make these people evangelists for the new solution. And by doing this, by getting 3 or 4 people, this is what, these are the steps that you have to take to get them to this journey. And if you can explain to them that there's this journey, and this is what they can expect, and this is what the outcome will be on the other side, and I'm going with you, and this is why the journey is going to be safe, and no one's going to get hurt, and everything's going to work out great, is because we've anticipated all the problems that are going to happen along the way. And so therefore, now all of a sudden, the risk is reduced. Now they see, oh, I'm with someone, I've got a guide, I've got someone who's been down this road before, who's thinking these things through. And half of the like if I told you at Halloween, the movie Halloween, that Jason's going to, do I have that right? Is it Jason jumps out at this point? He's got someone. And if I tell you ahead of time what's going to happen in the movie, then the movie's not nearly as terrifying anymore. And now you can get through it. Like, I hate scary movies. So, but if someone told me this is what's going to happen here and here and here, then I know, oh, okay. And now it's not terrifying anymore, and I'll sit through it. And it's sort of the same. It's kind of the same thing. People are facing a scary movie, and what they don't want is they don't want the risk that comes with making that decision. How's that?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, that's that fear can actually stop you from taking the next step, right? That's the
Totally. Yeah.
worst thing that can happen when you are in the journey of entrepreneurial journey, or of creating your own company. So how would you um what was I thinking? I had a specific question based on that example you gave. That was so good. How would they really understand like when to approach? For example, I have a blockage, and that's when we need a coach
Yeah.
such as you.
Right. Right.
Have that block. Okay, I have a blockage here. How do I go out of it, or how do I get through this? Right.
Yeah.
And you give me some help. You'll be like talk action points. Okay, try this approach. Try this approach.
Yeah.
For that, would you I'm talking about you right now. For
Yeah.
you, do you have to understand um, the product itself, or do you have to understand the person who is navigating through this? For you, how is your
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. If I have I don't want to sound uh, immodest here, but if I have a skill, and one of the skills I think I'm particularly good at is I am pretty good at understanding things from the customer's perspective. I try and think about it as a customer would, and I go so far as to think, and I write this in I have this written in my book, and that is that I I find out I try and think about ways that the deal is going to go south. Where's the deal going to where am I going to go off the rails? What's going to go wrong? And if I think about those things, not in some sort of paranoid or negative way, but if I think about those things, this is the journey again. If I can think about things like how is this going to go wrong? Then I can come up with an answer for that question. And so when I sit down and when I talk with somebody like you in your project or your company, I will ask like you to explain what it is you do and how you do it, and what's the problem, that you're solving, and how are you solving it. And then I think about it from the perspective of the customer, like how and I don't mean to be wrong, be uh, confrontational about this, but I try and think about, well, how could she be wrong? Why wouldn't this work? Why? And then what happens is I figure out, oh, here are the things that you need to address. And so that's kind of, so I don't necessarily, like, there are certain industry specifics. Like, I don't know, like, you're in the educational space, right? You're so
yeah, yeah,
so that's not a particularly strong area for me. So I'm going to have limitations, very specific niche sort of limitations, that I won't know this or that little gotcha. But generally speaking, I'll know what you're up against in that space. And the one thing that we all have that we can draw on is we have a lot more experience than we sometimes give our credit for, give ourselves credit for. So, like, for example, I've had kids in school, and so I can understand that. So I understand how schools work. They're collaborative, and there are principals, and there are assistant principals, and there are guidance counselors, and how they all work together. And it's there's a lot of consensus driven, and they're usually government, right, and so forth. They're funded by the local government in the U.S. and oftentimes, unless it's a private school, and then it's funded by the parents that are right. So you can that can kind of help inform you, and I kind of apply those sorts of things, as I think through the sales problem.
yeah. That having that conversation with you last time,
Yeah.
that gave me opened up so many thought process in my mind, right? I wouldn't have thought in those particular ways. When you just asked a question, you didn't really tell me, okay, this is the approach you can take, but the very act of asking question that opened up my, okay, this is how I should be thinking, or this is how I have to
Yeah.
ask myself, is this the route
Yeah,
I have to take?
and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
part of it is like, and much smarter people than I have explained this better, but it's not, you don't want answers. You really want good questions, and for me as a salesperson, it's part of what I think makes me good at what I do, is like, I'm quite curious about how things go, and how things work, and I'm quite happy to listen to someone explain something and understand it. And And then from that I can come up with ideas, and oh, this is how this might fit, or this is how we might solve this problem, or and the like. And so it's the questions that I think if I were to try and teach someone how to sell, I mean, the and this is kind of what I work on, is one of the things I would say is come up with a good set of questions. I actually have like a download that you can get. And maybe I'll provide you with the link, but there's a download. I have a series of worksheets that have a whole bunch of questions on them at various stages in the sales cycle, and you can kind of use those as a way to kind of formulate the specific questions that you need to formulate to to understand the problem from the customer's perspective.
That's great. Can you share? Like, can we share with the audience,
Oh
the
yeah,
listeners as well? I
yeah,
can put it in the
absolutely, yeah, sure.
description.
You just post a link or whatever, and you can just download it. Yeah, it's free.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
sure.
Thank you, Brendan. Yeah, so now I want to move to the last part of our
Yeah,
conversation. That is, there is so much thought process going in. You you want to cover, or we talked about this before, that it's an art, right? Sales is an art, and the art or the Zen part
yeah,
of the sales. What is it that gives this so much peace or internal um,
yeah.
satisfaction?
I so
Yeah.
so I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and that is, like, first of all, it's I get a lot of enjoyment out of helping people um, succeed as a result of selecting what I do, right? So if I'm selling database software, the fact that these people, that my customers are able to accomplish things with the software, or whatever I happen to be selling, if I can somehow or another contribute to that and make them successful, that gives me tremendous satisfaction. I really, it's just fun. And if I go into it that way, and as a result of that, I end up having a lot of great relationships with my customers. They're not all friends, and I do butt heads with them because I don't necessarily always agree with them, but I do try and uh, I tend to look out for their best interests in a way. I mean, so in that sense, so I will say, listen, you don't want to do it that way, and here's why. And this is, or if you're doing it that way, here are the trade-offs. Um, and for whatever reason, that's paid off for me, and that is because I think it comes from a genuinely good place. So um,
Yeah.
it's kind of how I I approach these things. In my experience, this you hear the term growth mindset a lot, or and that is, but it does seem to work out for me. It seems to me that if you pay off, the payoff is much greater, assuming that people are going to do the right thing and people are good, and that things are going to grow. I had an interesting conversation with I'm getting involved with a podcast, and so I'm working with a guy who's got a podcast. And months ago, I contacted him and said, "Hey, you're in the same space as I am. We both work on helping founders sell, and so I'd love to be in your podcast, but I'm sort of a competitor. I'm in the same space." He says, "No, I'd love to have you on." And that's sort of representative of kind of how I look at things, is like oftentimes, like, "Oh yeah, I'll have you. I'm happy to have you on. We'll talk about it." And sure enough, I ended up being a guest on the podcast, and then now we've become friends. And so it's funny how little competition there really is, and how much good can come if you have, like, I'm going off on a tangent now. I'm sorry about this. You can clip this part out if you want later, but I just generally tend to view things as from that kind of that perspective, from this growth mindset or abundance perspective.
Yeah, no, Brendan, I love that part you mentioned. It's that because that has a specific, the message there, that even if it's a competitor, you can talk to them. It's not like
Yeah.
you avoid them or, oh, I shouldn't be approaching them. But that's a very good message, and I love that you shared that part. So
Yeah, and by the way, I came to that later. I mean, in the beginning of my sales career, I, I really, oh, the competitor, it's a competitor. I can't talk to them. I can't tell you. But it turns out that, boy, I tell you, the competitors end up working for your company, and you end up leaving that company and going to somewhere else. And now one of your competitors, and the competitors really are all just people anyway, right? Right. That, there are other companies, but the companies are all made up of people. The example I like to use is I always see baseball players, and like when you watch baseball players, and they get on base, like someone gets a single and gets on base, and they end up, chatting with the first baseman, the runner, and like they're on different teams, but they're talking about whatever they're talking about. It's kind of funny how they're competitors, but they're not. They're all in the same. They're all in the same industry. So, you know,
yeah,
right.
that sports teaches that part very nicely, and we need that mindset in all other areas as well. We take it otherwise too
Yeah.
seriously.
Well, I'll use a different example. That's one where I'm really coming in from a position of ignorance, and that is, and we talked about this before the call started. I'm launching this learning community around sales, and it's been fascinating to me because I don't really know much about how to launch a community, and there's a lot to it, and one of the consequences of it has been that a lot of people have been really generous with their time and with comments and advice and guidance and basically guiding an idiot through the process. And it's been kind of really fun because I think of myself as really good at selling B2B, and I've had a lot of experience and that sort of thing. I know nothing about how to launch, or not, I know a fair amount now, but about how to launch a community, and people have just been really generous, and they allow you to make a lot of mistakes. And volunteer. And so I've got a bunch of great speakers and so forth, and they're all kind of volunteer. And I guess the point I would make in all this is that you have to, you shouldn't be afraid to look to other people to give you help and guidance. And I think that's true with customers as well. If I've been in situations where my customers have told me how to sell to them, and it's not that crazy an idea because ultimately they want a solution. They need a solution. And if you've got the right product, oftentimes a good customer will know ahead of time, oh, this is the product we want. And we want it, and here's why. And so they will actually kind of drag you along and kind of help you win because they win. And I think that's a mindset that a lot of um, salespeople or founders need to appreciate is that you're going into this, and if you've built something that's good, you should people will want to have it because it solves a problem and it makes their lives better and that sort of thing. And the one challenge you have, and this is one of those things that came up with my course, is I had to constantly tweak it, and this community is adjust it and learn from the feedback that I got. And it proved to be a kind of a really good opportunity for me to learn a lesson about how to launch something and how the kind of the process that founders go through. And because I was essentially going through it with this learning community. So it's like
Yeah.
you're always like you don't know everything. At least I don't. I know. In fact, I gave me a really good appreciation for how little I knew in certain areas. So
It
been, but it was fun, but
you
very
you're
fun.
s- yeah, you're strong with B2B, and I like that you're taking this community approach because I took a course on minimalist
Yeah,
entrepreneurship in Feb. It's
yeah,
Gumroad.
sure.
So the founder of Gumroad, Sahil, so he taught that
Yeah,
course, and he talks about community a lot. I can I can share the details about that as well. So it's, I think I can see you exactly following that model here.
Well,
And
he's great too.
yeah,
He's great. By the way, I have to say I'm a Gumroad investor.
yay, awesome.
Just a
He'll be very happy to know
disclosure,
that.
full disclosure. They did a big offering, a big public offering. He's a really clever guy, and I want them to be successful because I really think his philosophy is very consistent with my own, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. I don't want to take. I know you're extremely, tied up. You're helping people. Um, so last one, I want my listeners to, if they're interested and if they want to reach out to you, do you mentioned you have a course coming up that's on April
Yeah, it starts
19th,
at
right?
yeah, but it's going to be ongoing. I'm just going to keep it going as community. So it's just going to be
Okay.
it's a subscription based. One of the things I did was I made a lot of not mistakes, but I definitely miscalculated a bunch of things in the course of developing it. But the price is just it's like a subscription based, and it's like $15 a month, and so it's pretty affordable. And because really it's not really about it's really about kind of just getting a bunch of people together that want to talk about the same subject. And I'm just kind of very into this whole B2B sales world, and Twitter is kind of fascinating to me. And there's this element of serendipity that comes with communities, in the sense that you end up you don't exactly know how things are going to play out, but there are going to be some interesting things that are going to come out of having this group of people. And I suspect there are going to be some collaborations that come out of it. And you might be able to find a co-founder, or you might be able to find, I don't know, someone to help you with marketing or whatever. I don't exactly know what's going to happen, but I know that if you get 50, 100, 500 people, whatever the number is together, interesting things happen. And people like to be in that environment because ideas flow and you learn new things. And so that kind of just is part of the excitement behind doing this. So it's been a lot of fun. And so we're kicking it off with a thing on helping people with get familiar with Twitter and using Twitter to use the DMs, direct messages, and to use that in a way that's really kind of effective for engaging with prospects and customers. And there'll be like a little bit of a goal at the end and that sort of thing. So it should be it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome, Brendan.
So
Wish you the
and
best.
to find me,
Yeah.
the best way to find me,
Uh-huh.
I guess, is the easiest
Yeah.
way is on Twitter. Uh, Brendan McAdams @Brendan McAdams is the easiest way. And then the other stuff I'll put in the we can put in the link or whatever. You put links in
Yeah,
if you want, and there'll be
definitely.
and I'll get you a link so you can download the discovery questions, which people may find useful.
Excellent. That will be amazing.
Oh,
So, wish you all the best. Be great success for the community, and you've already building the community. I
yeah.
can see that it's you're helping people, and then the community. I'm a fan of your process already, so that's great. And I've seen how you are building it as well. So ap- approaching that building public
Yeah, it's
mindset,
been
right? Yeah.
it's been fun, and I suspect for others watching, it's probably been quite amusing too.
It is it's like you think of, okay, but how did Brendan approach this, and then you're taking that route. So yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate again you taking time and coming on this podcast and sharing all this incredible valuable
Oh,
knowledge with us.
it's been my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. I love this, and uh, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't already subscribed, please do subscribe and share the podcast with anyone you think would love to listen. Until next time, take care and stay safe.